Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
This episode is being sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Summit of Sex and Intimacy, which will be taking place in Salt Lake City, September 23rd and 24th. Leading sex experts, both Emily Nagoski, who is featured in this interview, and also Dr. Gina Ogden, will both be presenting at this summit. The purpose of the summit is to develop new interventions and methods to explore a client's sexual story, learn ways to help clients get unstuck in their sexuality, hear the latest research and evidence in increasing sexual desire, and how focusing on pleasure, not performance, is the key to healthy sexuality. The summit is meant for mental health professionals, and 12 CE credits for ASEC will be offered. As part of the sponsorship, this podcast will be available for free until the summit is over. Also, those who will subscribe to Mormon Sex Info between now and the summit will receive a $30 discount to the event. Thank you so much for listening. Hello and welcome to Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer-Parker, and I am thrilled to have Dr. Emily Nagoski on the show today. She is the author of New York Times bestseller, Come As You Are. She's the director of wellness education at Smith College, where she teaches women's sexuality. She has a PhD in health behavior with a minor in human sexuality from Indiana University and a master's degree in counseling, with a clinical internship at the Kinsey Institute Sexual Health Clinic. So welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much.
And would you prefer if I call you Dr. Nagoski or Emily?
Oh, please call me Emily, please.
Okay. Fill us in a little bit more about yourself. I gave a brief bio, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you're up to and what you're passionate about.
Sure, yeah. So I became a sex educator because I'm a giant nerd, and I always have been. When I got to college, I knew I'd be going to graduate school for something. I had no idea what. And so I thought, okay, so I need some volunteer work on my resume. So I asked the people who lived on my floor, what volunteer work can I do on campus to look good on my resume? And one guy who was pre-med said, hey, come be a peer health educator with me. And I was just like, okay, sure. So I applied and I got accepted and I got trained and I started going to residence halls on my college campus talking about like drinking and stress and also sex. And I moved from condoms and contraception into sexual violence prevention, and I ended up really loving it. So even though my undergrad degree is in cognitive science, basically, so psychology with minors in cognitive science and philosophy, and my plan was to be a clinical neuropsychologist, work with people with traumatic brain injury and stroke. I loved that intellectual stuff. I loved the brain and the science stuff, but the work I was doing as a sex educator and sexual violence prevention educator and responder made me like who I am as a human being in a way the academic stuff just couldn't. So I picked that path instead, and I ended up at Indiana University getting 2 graduate degrees. And I've been at Smith for 8 years now, and it's an incredibly interesting and fabulous place to work. And I wrote Come As You Are after teaching a class here called Women's Sexuality. And my last question on the final exam, this was this really intense, very science-y class. And at the end of the semester, I asked them to tell me just one important thing that they learned. Just anything, take it seriously, one important thing. And more than half of them, after all this science, I thought they were going to say, like, the attachment mechanism or arousal non-concordance. And instead, more than half of them just wrote, I learned that I'm normal. I learned that just because I'm different from other people doesn't mean I'm abnormal. I'm not broken. I learned that I'm normal. And so I'm sitting in my office reading that with tears in my eyes, thinking something really important happened in that classroom. And I want to share it with people who don't necessarily have access to like this kind of classroom education. And so 5 years later, Come As You Are came out.
That is an awesome story. That's amazing. I love that. And I'm hoping that that's exactly what this podcast can be about. And I'd like to set up the stage a little bit as far as the Mormon aspect of this. You're not Mormon, so you don't know much about that aspect of our culture. But I am hoping that this podcast can be about creating a love affair with our female genitalia. we have some positive messages in this in Mormonism and some not so positive messages. And so I want to start out by just saying I think that there's a lot of capacity for Mormon women to engage with their genitalia in more healthy ways than they have in the past, due to the fact that we believe that the body is a divine gift and that it has been created in a miraculous way by divine beings. And that is a beautiful concept. So we have a very pro-body position in Mormonism. And we also have this belief in a heavenly mother, so that deity includes both female and male. And even though we don't talk about her much or understand much about her, she is definitely a source of divine understanding about who we are as daughters of God. And since we believe in embodied gods, in other words, that we are built in the image of heavenly parents, I would assume that we would all believe that Heavenly Mother has genitalia like we do, as Heavenly Father would. Although it might be weird to talk about God's genitalia. That
sounds awesome.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily something that comes up in Sunday school at all, ever. I do think it's something that could psychologically be there as a resource for Mormon women and men, we're talking about women in particular today, to develop a different relationship with this area that in the rest of our culture oftentimes starts with this yuck factor, like potty training and germs and don't touch there and all of that stuff that from a pretty early age we develop other not so great messaging around our vulva, our vagina, and other parts of ourselves. So that's my overall startup that I want to set the stage with. And from there, I'd like to just invite you to start talking to us about female anatomy and why does it matter to know about our female anatomy? Why is that an important thing?
Yeah, so I love that question. And I mean, I could go so many different directions. So why does it matter? In particular, if you believe that the physical body that you live in is a divine gift, then how are we doing any kind of service to that body to view any part of it with shame and disgust? My point of view as a sex educator is that we know people who experience shame and disgust around their own body, whether it's their genitals or any other aspect of their body's shape or size or any smells, all the natural organic things that are true about our bodies. When people experience shame and disgust around it, they experience less sexual pleasure, more sexual dysfunction, and are more likely to experience pain with sex. So there are lots of really good, straightforward medical reasons to have a strong, positive connection with our bodies, including our genitals. And it's a way to, I think, honor our partners. So if you're in a relationship with someone and a sexual connection is a part of that, then how are we really doing justice by our partner if we bring to that sexual connection this big black box of ignorance and don't go there around a part of our body that's just as important to our partner as every other part of our body. Maybe in some instances, in some moments, even more important than some other parts of our body. So I think it does justice to our sexuality, to what it means to live inside a body and what it means to have a sexual connection with a partner, if we really understand our own bodies and love every part of it.
Amen. I think that's so important and such a struggle for women because so many messages tell us how we're not enough, right? Whether it's the magazine covers or even religious cultures, you're not dressed the right way or you're not presenting yourself in a way where you're going to be attractive to the opposite sex, or
you're presenting yourself in a way where you are going to be attractive to the opposite sex. Yeah.
Right? Too attractive. Walking pornography, whatever those types of things are, right?
Whatever you're doing, you are doing it wrong.
Yeah. And pretty much all products are sold to us with this messaging.
Right. Yes. So the message is definitely whatever you're doing it wrong. If you buy our thing, you will feel better and be better and come closer to the aspirational self that you are supposed to be, but aren't. And once you finally attain that aspirational self that you are supposed to be, then, and only then, will you be fully deserving of love and participation in the human experience. And the thing is, who we are right now is already worthy of love and full participation in the human experience. We don't have to wait until we're something else. And the way to get to the place where you like where you are is to let go of that aspirational something, the pieces of it that are just cultural nonsense, just noise designed to make you feel bad about yourself, to motivate you to buy crap. And instead, look at who you are. And I mean this very literally. I mean, look in a mirror naked at your body. Take a hand mirror and look at your genitals. Look at what the body is that you have been given and find things that you like about it. It wouldn't be this like, wow, if your body's a divine gift, how can you do anything but love every inch of it and every moment of living inside it? If you can't love it, which I understand is difficult because we all get cultural messages about the ways our bodies are inadequate and flawed and unwelcome, if you can at least be neutral and be like, oh, that's a thing that's true about the body I have. Yep, that's a thing that's true. And it's not a source of shame or disgust. It's just a thing that's true. Look at your actual body and find the things that are true. And if possible, the things that you like about it.
I love that. Yeah, I often talk about the isn't it interesting approach, because this is such a shift in our thinking that we have to get practice at. And so, you can look at yourself and you're like, oh, well, Emily told me to like my body. Well, crap, I'm not liking my body.
And so you beat yourself up for beating yourself up. Yeah. That's not the way to do it. Just note, oh, look, there's that noise again. There's me beating myself up again. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It takes practice to stop beating yourself up.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's what I mean by that. It's interesting. It's like, well, isn't it interesting that I just shamed myself through an imaginary Emily? And isn't it interesting that, which brings it more into a non-judgmental stance, even if you're feeling judgmental at the time. So that takes practice. Okay,
and it's even harder with our sexual bodies, I would add. We get excited when our babies find their feet. Like, we just think it's adorable when you have a little baby who discovers her feet for the first time. You're like, yay, you found your feet, right? And when she discovers her vulva, what do we say to her?
Yikes.
Don't touch that.
Yep.
Right? Do not have that same feeling. Why? Her feet are just as much a part of her body as her vulva, as her knees, as her elbows. Like, all of it is hers. It is the body she was given. It is the one and only thing she has with her at birth that she's also going to have with her on the day she dies.
That's right. And how those anxieties as parents come up pretty quickly for us. Like, they're really instinctual. And that's
we get so
something
scared.
we can really resist, for sure. Yeah, so let's go back to your mirror exercise, which I think is a lovely thing to do with yourself. And it might feel awkward and corny or whatever at first, but that's
it absolutely
fine.
will, yes.
Yep. So what are people going to see? What are women going to see? And how do we start explaining the parts?
Yes. So when you look at a vulva, I'm going to go sort of north to south. So if you're lying on your back, and you've got, you wouldn't be lying. You're sort of like sitting up, right? With a mirror between your knees. Right up at the top, what you're going to see, we'll start from the outside. There's the labia, which are the sort of stretchy, a little bit spongy kind of tissue where the hair grows on the outside, and you can part them and they look like lips, only covered in hair. I'm guessing that shaving vulvas is not a thing that's super popular among Mormon women.
It can or can't be. So it's a mix, because I think that a lot of women in Mormonism feel very much pressured to be up to date on fashion and body things. So I think what is it called? The Brazilian, right? Or
right.
The wax.
Brazilian is the full wax.
Yeah, that can happen for Mormon women. Not all, for sure. So there's a spectrum of how important this is. Like, for example, just so you know, plastic surgery is super high in Utah.
I did not know that.
An interesting conflict of interest as far as kind of this idea of we have this body from God that we accept and love versus I need to be my best self, be perfect, feel all this pressure to perform as a wife and a mother and be young and all.
It sort of seems to me that if your body is a divine gift, then you already are perfect.
Yeah, and I don't know why we don't.
Like, why does a culture's standard of what counts as a perfect body trump what God considers a perfect body?
Yeah, and I think it's the conflation of messages. So I think Mormon women take that perfection piece from Mormonism, but then they take the cultural piece that they're living within about what it means to have a perfect body, and that gets really messed up. Because I think in church, obviously, you're not going to hear a message of you should go get plastic surgery. In fact, you do hear messages like, you're a divine daughter of God. God loves you just like you are. We have all these values for the young women, which are actually really self-promoting and self-positive. Like you have divinity in your nature and you should totally accept yourself. So we have that, but we also are very, how would I say, behavior-oriented and checklist-oriented and doers, and we're going to really be the best we can be, And so then if the culture tells you, well, the best you can be is perky breasts and no wrinkles and certain size, and then that gets very conflated, I think, for Mormon women.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to genitals, there is no better that you can be than what you were given. It's already fabulous. And if you choose to remove hair, there are lots of reasons why a person might decide to do that, and that's completely fine. And it's also completely fine to leave it there. Either way, it's your body. You get to decide, basically. So just a clarification of terms, when a woman is standing up and looking in the mirror, she's that V that you see when she's standing up where hair grows, which you may or may not keep, that's called the mons, M-O-N-S. And that's not the vulva itself. The vulva itself is when you split part your legs and you look in a mirror where you see the lips opening, that's the vulva. The vagina, which is the word that often gets used to refer to all this stuff, the vagina itself is actually the reproductive canal. It's where the baby comes out and where the menstrual blood comes out. And if you're having penile vaginal intercourse, that's where the penis goes in. Does that distinction make sense?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that we call it the vagina when it's the one part we really can't see very well.
Yeah, you can't so much see it. You can see the entrance of it. You can put your fingers inside it. You should make sure your fingernails are nice and short and clean when you do that. And there should be some lubrication there. If your own natural lubrication isn't enough to make it comfortable, go ahead and use a little saliva if you like. Get some commercial lube. I don't necessarily recommend using any sort of oil inside the vagina because it might just sort of stay there and go rancid, and that's not great. But there are lots of other kinds of like water-based lubes that you can buy that are really, really great. So that's what the vagina actually is. And yeah, it's important to me that we call things by their actual names. Calling the whole package the vagina, that's sort of the equivalent of calling your throat your face, right?
Yeah.
We're missing some important parts there.
And what would you say is the best name? Because I even sometimes wonder, is vulva really the best name for the whole thing,
Vulva is the word we have for the whole package.
Okay.
For the whole like external, all the stuff. I also recommend people getting really comfortable with the word clitoris. The clitoris is the female equivalent of the penis, and it has, even though it's about 1/8 the size of the penis, it actually has almost twice as many nerve endings. So it is massively more sensitive than the penis is. And it is located right at the top of the vulva. It's sometimes tucked between the labia and sometimes it extends outward. Clitorises vary a lot in their shape and size. Sometimes it looks like just a little tiny nub at the top of the vulva, and you have to sort of like tug upward and pull the labia apart to see it. And sometimes you can really see it looks like a miniature head of a penis. And all of that variation in shape and size is equally normal and healthy. There is no right or wrong way for a clitoris to look. There is just the shape and size of the clitoris that you have. They are all healthy and normal. Got that so far?
Absolutely. And
okay.
I love talking about the clitoris because,
Yay!
Again, from a Mormon perspective, I think we've got a wonderful sex positive message, and that the only purpose that we scientifically know of that the clitoris exists is for pleasure. And why would God create a female body that has a part that is only for pleasure? I think that's
that has
very
twice as many nerve
message.
Endings in this tiny, like there has to be something going on there.
Yeah.
I prefer to say that its only function is sensation. It's like a really finely tuned antenna, right? It will receive sensation as pleasurable in the right context when there is trust and safety and comfort. And when there aren't those things, when the context is not right, when a person really isn't sure, when they're in a situation where they don't want to necessarily be, it will still receive sensation, but it won't feel as good.
I think that's a great distinction. Thank you.
Like tickling, I'm sure, like, you know, if you get tickled when you're in a sort of flirty, fun, playful state of mind by your certain special someone, that can feel really good. I know tickling is not everyone's favorite, and that's completely fine. But at least hypothetically, you can imagine a way that tickling could feel good and lead to good things. And if that same certain special someone tries to tickle you when you are frustrated with them, how does that feel?
Not so great.
Exactly. Yeah. The clitoris is very much like tickling, right? Under the right circumstances, it can feel really great. And under the wrong circumstances, not necessarily.
Yeah. And there's also distinctions I know from talking to many, many women. Some women really like direct contact.
Mm-hmm.
Some women, it's too much. Like it's too sensitive. And so I think sometimes men are just like, oh, I need to go for the clitoris, you know, and they really want their partner to feel good.
And they poke at it like it's a doorbell.
Yes, exactly. Because, you
Which
know,
some people do really love, and other people, like, don't touch the clitoris directly. You can touch the labia to either side. Some people really like it if you, so for example, if you press your fingers flat right at the split of the labia and tug upward, you're actually tugging on the shaft of the clitoris. And it's this really indirect way to stimulate the clitoris. Or some people like to have like one or two fingers right over the clitoris, going back and forth really fast, usually using some kind of lubrication. Some people prefer to sort of cup their whole hand over the vulva and just use pressure and circles, kind of. So there's lots of different ways to stimulate a clitoris. Lots of different ways. And every clitoris has a different preference.
Yeah, which is why communication and ego check is so important. Because it doesn't mean you're a bad lover if you're not doing it right the first time. That's your ego check. And communication is figuring out how to talk about these things and figure out what's right for each person.
Right. And how scary is it to have your partner be touching you in a way that they really want to be giving you pleasure, and you know that they want to be giving you pleasure, and because you were gender socialized feminine, what you were taught is that your job is to make sure that everyone else's needs are met and everyone else, their emotional needs are fully satisfied, and they feel good about themselves, and they never get their feelings hurt, and they feel excellent about the situation, and they're touching you in a way that maybe doesn't necessarily work for you, and they say, do you like that? Like, what do you say in that moment? If you're just following the social rules, what you say is, yes.
Right.
Not because it's your intention to deceive your partner, but because you want to make sure that they feel good.
It's caretaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking care of your partner at the expense of yourself and ultimately at the expense of your relationship.
Exactly, which is such an irony because I talk about this a lot in marriages, like the protection model marriage versus the intimacy model marriage, where we will not show up authentically because we don't want to hurt each other's feelings, but then that also takes its toll.
Yeah, exactly. So being able to say, and there is actually a really good strategy, and it is, the shortcut version is treat your partner like a superhero. Whatever it is they're doing right, praise the bananas out of whatever it is they're doing that feels good.
Right.
And then when they're doing something that is not quite right, you return to, you know what I love, you know what I would do. Do you like that? Your answer is not no, because that has the potential to be hurtful. Like, I know, because it's really hard to let go of trying to take care of the other person's ego. Instead of saying no, just say, you know what I really love, or I know what we should try. How about we blah, blah, blah. So it's not a direct no. Direct no's have their place, absolutely. But if you're really concerned about making sure your communication is gentle and positive and doesn't shut the other person down or make them feel rejected, just make it a suggestion of, I love it when you whatever this, or I wonder what it would feel like if you try this other thing.
I like that. That's great. Okay, so we've got the mons, we've got the labia, we've got the clitoris.
Yes. Which you can find visually, and you can find it with your hand. When you wiggle a finger down between your labia right at the top, you'll feel a sort of little rubbery kind of cord in there. Underneath the skin, the skin will shift around over top of it. That's the shaft of the clitoris.
And also understanding that the clitoris, actually, I've I've heard it referred to as an iceberg, like you only see the
Yes.
very tip of it, but
Yep.
the majority of it is underneath here.
Yeah, deep inside the tissue of the vulva are the legs of the clitoris, which they cover the entire area and at the mouth of the vagina. So when you stimulate the head of the clitoris up at the top of the vulva, it results in lubrication at the mouth of the vagina, usually.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about the hymen?
Oh, I could tell you so many things about the hymen. Basically, everything everyone ever gets taught about the hymen is fundamentally wrong. Sorry about that.
I love it. That's what I totally want to talk about, is what's right.
Yeah. So the hymen, people vary, first of all, in the kind of hymen they might have. Some people are born without a hymen. Doesn't mean anything at all. It's just individual variability. Some people have a hymen that's a sort of crescent right at the mouth of the vagina. So I learned about the hymen initially by reading romance novels. And I thought that the hymen was sort of like halfway up the vagina. That's not where it is. It's right at the mouth of the vagina. It does not tear or break with first intercourse, or if it does tear, it heals. It might bruise. The most common cause of pain with first intercourse has nothing to do with the hymen and is about lack of lubrication and going too fast, basically. So there's the regular hymen, there's the septate hymen, which actually has sort of two openings, so it feels like a strand of tissue across the mouth of the vagina, which you can stretch to get out of the way, or you can go to the doctor, and it's, just in the doctor's office, they can locally anesthetize and cut it to get it out of the way. There's the imperforate and semi-perforate hymens, which may obstruct menstruation, and that's sort of how you find out that you have it. If it does bruise or break, it heals, and there is zero relationship between the size and shape of your hymen and whether or not your vagina has ever been penetrated. I'm going to say that again. There is zero relationship between the size and shape of your hymen and whether or not your vagina has ever been penetrated.
Wow. And so it's not something that just goes away either, like once it's been penetrated.
Yeah, there are people who have had babies whose hymens are intact.
Interesting.
What it does do is stretch and become flexible through a combination of practice and hormones.
And what's its purpose?
There is no purpose.
It just exists.
Yeah, it's like, why do men have nipples? Because.
And it has caused much heartache over the last several millennia. That's why it exists.
It has killed women. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not a laughing matter, actually.
This set of myths that we have, so all of this comes from a culture that views women as property within a culture. So the men are the ones who fight for the property, and that includes the land, the women, and the children they bear. And you see, a fold of tissue at the mouth of the vagina, which is where the babies come out, and you see it as a sort of like gated community. Like my husband jokingly calls it the freshness seal. And that is all just this wrong-headed metaphor laid over top of women's bodies under the assumption that that body belongs to some man or other. And it's all just a myth. It's all just this big old lie that we now have in certain cultures. Virginity tests, like you can tell by looking whether or not a vagina has been penetrated by something. Yeah, you can't. You can't tell by looking. You cannot tell by looking. That is all a lie.
Reconstructive surgeries even going
right,
on for hymens.
Because it matters so much that you have this totally useless fold of tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And therefore, some of the other myths I think that oftentimes women hear that you're addressing is you don't necessarily bleed when you have sex the first time.
No, there is no reason under healthy circumstances you should ever bleed with intercourse.
And along with that, intercourse should really never hurt.
Yeah,
including the first time.
Including the first time.
And
the way to make it not hurt is to preheat the oven, basically.
Right.
Take a long time in the warm up and the build up. Don't get to intercourse until your body feels like warm and tingly and you have this sort of like energy flowing through you. There might be sort of waves of muscle tension happening in your body. When you are quite aroused, maybe even after you've had an orgasm, that is the right time to go for intercourse.
Right. So that's how a lot of women are warned about their first experience, which in Mormon culture often happens on honeymoon night. And so there's this fear, there's this excitement, but there's also this fear that I'm going to experience something that I'm not going to like.
Sure.
And what an awful way to start a sexual journey together.
Right. Yeah, the sort of having to get through it. Ugh.
Right.
I'm not Mormon, and that's what I got taught too. So.
Yeah, no, these are very common things, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think women they pass along that myth in order to be helpful. Like, well, just so you're aware of what to expect. And in a sense, it's not helpful at all.
Yeah, we should be teaching girls to expect sex to be pleasurable. And that's what's so scary to people. That's what freaks people right the heck out.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Well, I want to mention too that there's a big increase in labia surgery because
plastic surgery.
Yeah, to your point of labia come in all shapes and sizes and even colors. That is not something that you see in pornography usually, and that is not something that...
I'm guessing that the Mormon Church's position around pornography is maybe don't look at it.
It is, and yet we look at it at higher rates than probably the rest of the country. So that's a whole nother podcast.
Wow.
I think there's a lot of shame and anxiety around pornography, and so I think especially men in the church look at pornography. So this may not be such an issue for Mormon women who, first of all, have never looked at themselves, don't know what they look like, are showing up very uneducated maybe to the marital bed. However, I've heard of situations where the husband is quite taken aback by labia that doesn't seem to look the way he thought it would look.
Yeah.
And then that shame is very much immediately picked up on by the wife.
Absolutely, yeah. God. Yeah, so here's my thing about porn. So my point of view as a secular sex educator is that porn can be good entertainment, it can be fun, and it is not sex education. It is not how people actually have sex. It's not how bodies actually look in real life, and it is not how people behave in real life. To view porn as like representation of how people actually have sex is like looking at NASCAR and thinking of that as the way people drive.
Right.
So if you're making comparisons, you're comparing the wrong things. Porn is really visual by design, and the sex that human beings have, visual is a component of it, but it's every sense is involved, and it is especially tactile. It's about how this human being feels in the bed with you, how you feel emotionally with each other, and how you feel physically with each other. What are the sensations happening inside your body? Turn your attention toward what feels good in your body rather than what things look like.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with that more. So we've talked a lot about the anatomy and some basic myths that we've wonderfully dispelled.
It's going to take people time to especially the ones about the hymen, it's going to take them time to let it go because we all, for so many decades, have been taught these totally wrong things.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So then let's move into the other piece of this, which is the arousal piece. And this is what I probably get most questions on, when I have sex therapy clients, especially women, is these questions of why am I not aroused, or how do I become more aroused, or how does arousal work, and is there something wrong with me, or am I asexual, and all these kinds of questions that have a lot to do with what do I now do with my anatomy?
Yep. There it is. I feel okay about it. And now what? So we talked about the hardware between your legs, basically. So now we talk about the hardware between your ears. There's a mechanism in your brain that controls sexual response, which, because it's called the dual control mechanism, you can guess how many parts there are.
2.
There's 2 parts to the dual control mechanism. And if I tell you that the first part is the sexual accelerator or the gas pedal, that means the second part must be
the brakes.
The brake, exactly. So the accelerator is the one we all sort of have an intuitive sense of, right? So it notices all the sexually relevant stimulation in the environment, everything you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine that your brain codes as sexually relevant, and it sends the turn on signal. And it's scanning the environment sort of all the time. Even right now, just the fact that we're talking about sex is a little tiny bit sexually relevant. So it's this little tiny turn on thing happening, right?
Right.
And at the same time that that's happening, in parallel, your brake is noticing all the very good reasons not to be turned on right now. Everything you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine that your brain codes as a potential threat. And it sends a signal that says turn off.
Right.
So the process of becoming aroused is not just the process of turning on all the ons, it's the dual process of turning on the ons and turning off the offs. And it turns out when people struggle with sexual arousal, pleasure, desire, orgasm, it's sometimes because there's not enough stimulation to the gas pedal, but it is more often because there's too much stimulation to the brake, which completely changes how you approach dealing with difficulties with sexuality.
Yeah, and this really fits into my whole non-researched theory that we spend so much time in Mormonism and in other areas of our lives giving sexual education at a time when we don't want anybody to be having sex, right? So from ages 12 to 17 or whatever, that's when they and so most of the sexual messages that people are receiving are about the dangers of sex, the risks of sex, how we absolutely don't want you to have sex, and tied to that all the religious messages, which then make it even worse because now your relationship with God is affected if you have sex. It's really heavy, and boy, those brakes are on tight.
Yeah, they have to be. Because the thing is, sex feels really good when it's done right. And so if you do just a little bit of sexual stuff, like a make out with somebody, that's going to hit the accelerator. And it's a good thing you've got a brake because it's going to prevent you from moving forward. It's the thing that even though this feels really good, now is not the right time. And then you get into a situation where you're ready.
Right.
And you want to have the sex and your brakes are still on.
Like you got married.
Yeah. So you get married and that all that brakes hitting education you had doesn't magically disappear.
Yeah, it's earlier that day it was a heinous sin if we had sex, right? But now this evening we can do it.
Especially if you spent your entire life being taught that the thing that's going to happen tonight on your wedding night gonna hurt. Does that idea hit the accelerator? Oh, I can't wait to do this thing that's going to physically hurt. It hits the brakes. Right. So you approach even your very first sexual experience with the brake on. And you know what? The more you believe it's going to hurt, the more the brakes are on, the more it actually will hurt.
Yeah. Which is so tragic.
Yeah.
Right? This is why education is so pivotal.
So crucial. Yeah. So I really recommend people get a sense of what hits their accelerators, what does the turning on, and what are the sorts of things that happen either in the external environment that hit the brake, and also what are the sort of ideas and beliefs that keep the brakes on chronically. For a lot of people, stress, just like life stress, hits the brakes. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. Body self-criticism is huge, very, very common. Body self-criticism hitting the brakes. And when you've been raised in a culture that taught you you're not supposed to be having sex, that sex is dirty, dangerous, disgusting, all of that keeps the brakes on chronically. And you have to unlearn all of those messages.
So how do you do that?
Very carefully. So there's a gradual process of when you're moving into a sexual situation or experiencing any sort of sexual sensations, you begin to notice the chatter in your brain that starts to activate the brakes. People will experience the brakes differently. For some people, it's a very physical experience of things shutting down. For some people, it's an intellectual or cognitive experience where there's noise, chatter in their brains, visuals that get in the way. They experience it very much up in their head. And for other people, it's really emotional. So where they want to be feeling trusting and connected with their partner and feeling turned on, instead they're feeling really fearful or anxious or angry or sad or shut down in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So different people experience the brakes in different ways, and different people have different things that activate the brakes. If your grandmother walks in the room, that clearly is going to slam the brake on, right? If you're in the middle of some things and your grandma walks in, bang, like straightforward. You can be distracted by like grit on the sheets. Like that's going to keep the brakes on. There are solutions. Lock the door, change the bed sheets. Sometimes it's really easy. Are your feet cold? Put on socks, right? There are simple solutions.
Right.
There are the other things like the cultural messages telling you that sex is dirty, dangerous, and disgusting. That's going to take time, where you notice the brake coming on and you have that, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Well, there's that. Yep. And I'm just going to very gently set you to one side and return my attention to the pleasure that's happening in my body. And the more you practice that, setting those other things aside and returning your attention to the pleasure, the more resistant you get to those interrupting brakes hitters. And gradually, the less and less they will do interrupting.
Right, which is, in a sense, you describing kind of a very simplistic mindfulness exercise.
That's exactly what it is.
So I think this goes well with what I've read in your book, where you talk about this threefold system: expecting, eagerness, enjoyment. So yes. Do you mind talking about those?
Oh, yes, please. So sex obviously is not the only emotional mechanism in your brain. You have lots and lots of other emotional systems happening in your brain, and they all are controlled by these three intersecting systems. One is about, in the mainstream media, you see it referred to as the pleasure center of the brain, which is the reward. It feels good, the endorphins and stuff like that. And so that's one component of this system. It has two other components that are related, but not identical. So one is about the pleasure, like you do a thing and it feels good and that's pleasure, right? Then there is eagerness, which is the active wanting, the moving toward something, that sense of like that right there, I want more of that, right? And we often think of wanting and liking, eagerness and enjoying as being identical, and they are not. It is absolutely possible to want something without liking it. We've all been there, right? And it's possible to like something without it activating desire for more of it. You can just be like, oh, that feels good, and I'm done. Thanks. So they're non-identical, but often they go together. And then the third one is eagerness, or expecting, sexual relevance. So this is a terrible analogy, but it's the best one I've got. In Psych 101, you learn about Pavlov's dogs. He trained dogs. He would give them food and then ring a bell, give them food and ring a bell, and give them food and ring a bell. And eventually he could just ring a bell and the dog would start salivating. Because when you hand a dog food and he's hungry, he starts salivating. So when the dog heard the bell, his brain expected food to come, and so it started salivating, right? So it learns that the bell was food relevant. Yes. So our genitals do the same thing. They learn what counts as sexually relevant. So when Pavlov rang the bell, did that mean the dog really found the bell delicious and very much wanted to lick the bell?
No.
Yeah, no, it was just sexually relevant. It had nothing to do with eagerness to get to the bell. It had nothing to do with pleasure. It had no experience of enjoying the bell. It just found the bell food relevant. So when blood flows to our genitals, that is the reflex in response to the learning that our bodies have done over the course of our lives to what counts as sexually relevant.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I think too that idea that we're going to always have desire come first it kind of fits into this, right? So that yes, you can be willing to engage with your partner kind of in a mild, interested way.
Yeah, willing,
sure.
Open.
Yeah, you're willing, but you're not really sure you're that hot at that moment.
Yeah.
And you may stay there and just engage at that level, but you also may find yourself shifting along the way, and that's actually very normal. I think sometimes people have this expectation that, no, I need to come to the table with a lot of desire to begin with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we have this sort of false metaphor of desire for sex as a hunger. And the thing is, hunger is a physical drive. If you don't eat, you could die, right? That's why we experience hunger spontaneously, because your body has this alarm system saying there is something wrong, you need to fix it, or something very bad is going to happen. That's what hunger is.
Right.
Sex is not one of those. Sex is curiosity. It's about, oh, look at that interesting thing over there. Let me go explore that and see what I like. It's a much more accurate metaphor is like reading. Sometimes you're sort of like not in the mood for a book, but you pick it up and you read a couple chapters. And if it's a good book, you're like, oh, I would really like to read this whole entire book right now. Right? And other times you're not in the mood and you pick up the book and you're like, I would rather watch TV. I'm not there right now. And, if the book isn't good enough, that also is not going to hold your attention, which is why communicating with your partner about what you like is so very important. My 3-word summary of all this stuff is just pleasure is the measure. Put pleasure at the center of your definition of sexual well-being, and all the sort of nonsense shakes out and the good things come. So if you agree to pleasure, your partner is like, I would like to have some of the sexy times. And you're like, then you're like, okay, I'll try out some things. We'll do some things we both like. We'll do some things we enjoy. And if that lights the fire, great. And if it doesn't light the fire, still great, because we did things that we both liked. And if you are constantly not getting to a place where it lights the fire, probably it's because there are things hitting the brake, preventing it. It's like sort of like making your kindling wet. I'm mixing metaphors here, but if pleasure doesn't light the fire, it's because the brakes are on.
Right.
So you need to start thinking about, so what is it that's hitting the brake?
Which can be a variety of things.
So many different things.
Yeah. And that's where
relationship factors, your own health, and talking to a therapist is a great idea at that point. Talking to your partner is a great idea. Just sitting and like making a list, really noticing what's going on in your internal experience when the brakes are on, to figure out what it is that's activating the brakes is going to vary a lot from person to person and even from day to day. And people also get sort of entrenched in some not so healthy patterns around initiation, especially. This sort of resentment builds up when one person is always initiating and the other person is now feeling pushed. I call it the chasing dynamic. Because the more one person asks, the more pushed and guilty the other person feels. And then that just hits the brakes some more, makes them more likely to say no next time. And the person who's always asking feels bad about always asking, but also feels frustrated and rejected. And so asks some more, which makes the person feel even worse. And it just is a nightmare. So
Right.
the solution is actually fairly straightforward, which is stop doing that. Stop having any kind of sex. Stop trying to have any kind of sex. And a couple times a week, just touch each other in a way that feels good. Sensual, connected, touching with no agenda to have it turn into anything other than pleasurable sensation. Pleasure is the measure. There's a sex therapist in New Jersey who taught me this analogy. So if you're not in the sort of like dreadful, horrible trap of the chasing dynamic, but just sort of a little bit stuck, I find this party metaphor to be really useful. Like if your really good friend invites you to a party, you say, yes, of course, because it's a party and it's your really good friend. And then as the date approaches, you start thinking, oh, I'm going to have to arrange childcare. There's going to be all this traffic.
Do my nails.
Yeah, I got to like wear real clothes on a Friday night. I'm just not sure I'm up for it. I want to put on my pajamas. But the thing is, like, it's your really good friend and you said you would go, so you go. And what happens? You have fun at the party. If you are having fun at the party, you're doing it right.
Right.
And there is no amount of like wanting to go to parties that will make the party worth going to.
Right.
So pleasure is the measure.
I love that. What about when people get to the point where they're really like, you know what? I could care less if I ever read another book again.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried different kinds of books. I've tried reading the book just because you like to read the book. I have tried. And really, when it comes right down to it, I could care less if I ever read a book again.
I'm not a reader.
I'm not a reader.
Yeah, right.
But I'm in this marriage, or in this relationship where I'm expected to read. And that's causing a lot of distress for me and resentment, and I'm feeling really stuck. And is there something really wrong with me? Or does my partner just need to accept me for who I am? Or am I asexual and I just need to face that possibility? Like these are questions I get quite a bit.
Yeah, and some people are asexual and sex is just not for them. They're going to experience not just sort of like meh around sex, they'll often experience an active repulsion, a sort of like disgust response at the entire idea that is native to them from their earliest sexual experiences. There's just no aspect of them that's like, actually, this is really good, but I know I'm not supposed to. That's not the same thing.
My understanding, as far as the little research we have on this, is like it's less than 1% of the population.
Yeah, it's about 1% of the population. And these are folks whose accelerators are really just not very sensitive. And there's a lot of individual variability in the sensitivity of the accelerator and the brake. So folks with sort of not, it just takes a whole lot of sexual stimulation for their brain to get into a place where it's actively interested and engaged with sexual stimulation, which is a different experience from having a sensitive brake and having your brake on all the time. Then your accelerator may respond and notice sexually relevant stimulation, and you'd be like, that's the sexual thing that's happening, and my brakes are on, and we're not going anywhere. So two really different experiences. And in particular, when people have been in a relationship for quite a long time, they may build up. It's sort of like the gunk in your pipes, right? You build up some crap over the years, and if you don't clean out the pipes, it'll get clogged. There has to be a cleaning out of the pipes that happens, or else it will keep the brakes on. The sort of like resentment about all the stuff in your relationships, the little sort of wearing away at trust in your relationship, that stuff can make it really difficult to engage with your partner sexually. Having kids is a marker for a lot of couples because it changes the birth parent's body and their experience of their body in really fundamental ways. You have to relearn your body, build an entirely new relationship with it from scratch. And if your partner is expecting you to like get back on the pony as if nothing is different, then that's going to create pressure and resentment and build a giant wall where you're like, yeah, I'm just go away. Like, I'm not interested. I've been pawed by baby hands all day. No. If your partner brings anything other than like compassion and support and patience to that transitional phase of a relationship, it can build a permanent wall in a relationship.
Yeah, and it's tragic because these lovely things that we love and that we want to have completely throw a wrench in the whole system. Because
nobody ever taught us how to negotiate or navigate having bodies that are both parent bodies and sexual bodies. Then you can close the door and let go of all those other identities and all those other roles and just allow yourself to experience sensual pleasure with your partner. Especially from a religious setting where the mother is a virgin, symbolically, right? Which is really weird because most of us can't live to that ideal. Nope. And the, the sultry, sexy model is the one who ruined all humankind, by eating of the apple, which actually in Mormonism, we don't have that story mean the same thing. But I think Christianity has definitely fed us that temptress. Yeah. You do have Mary Magdalene, right? Yes. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. The two Marys, the whore and the Madonna, right? That split of what you're supposed to be. Right. So becoming a mother can feel very asexual in of itself. It can be totally desexualizing. It can feel that way, absolutely. Unless you make a concerted effort and your partner is right there with you, knowing that this is a process and it changes everything. And there are just going to be times when you're exhausted. People really discount the impact of sleep deprivation on sexual interest and pleasure. Oh, for sure. We've talked about the breaks, which I think is a super important part. What about learning how to pay attention to the accelerators? Like you're saying, it's always kind of there, but what types of things should women be cluing into to even give themselves permission to think about what's accelerating? So, wow, permission to think about what's accelerating. It depends on what, because it's a break to have there be something preventing you from noticing the accelerator. The only innate sexually relevant stimulus that we're born with is genital sensations, right? So one of the ways to notice what hits the accelerator, what counts as sexually relevant, is to pay attention to genital sensations. But that's not always useful because your genitals respond to anything that's sexually relevant. And again, that's not the same as wanting it or liking it. Like if you bite into a moldy, bruised peach, your mouth might water, but that does not mean that you really want or like that moldy bruised peach, right?
Right.
So it's a very rough starting place for noticing what hits the accelerator. Mostly the thing is to look at context. So what are the situations? The research on context shows that a person's own mental and physical health can be really important in their awareness of and connection with sexually relevant stimulation. Their relationship characteristics, especially trust and affection and attachment. Partner characteristics, and not just whether or not they're physically attractive to you, but do you respect them and like who they are? Couples who sustain strong sexual connections over multiple decades are not couples who have a hot and heavy, can't wait to stuff my tongue down your throat kind of relationship. The couples who sustain strong sexual connections over multiple decades are couples who prioritize sex and who have a strong friendship at the foundation of their relationship. So you're friends with this person, and you've decided that it is important for the quality of this relationship that sometimes, even though you might have kids to raise and you might have jobs to go to and other people you want to hang out with sometimes and family you're supposed to be seeing, and, sometimes you just want to watch TV, there is going to be a time at some point when you will close the door, stop doing all these other things, and just engage with each other sensually, touch each other's bodies. That's not important to every couple, but couples who sustain strong sexual connections, it's because they choose sex as a way to spend time together because it feels really important to the quality of their relationship.
Yeah, and intentionality in a sense. Yep. Which we do that in Mormon marriages in the sense of date night. There's this idea of make sure you prioritize your marriage, make sure you go on a date every week. But I think there's something even more that we could get more specific about, which is how do we prioritize our sexuality together, not just going out to a movie.
Right. And especially if it tends to be sort of behaviorally based, like we did the thing, good, now we're done. Have it not just be about like, did we check the thing off the list? Did we do the thing? But did we experience pleasure together?
Did we enjoy it?
Yeah.
So
did we like
it? Look forward to the next time.
And what are the contexts that you can create together that allow both people to experience pleasure? Especially, so like, what are the things that do feel sexy? Is there a certain kind of underwear that you wear that makes you feel super, super good? Or is there a certain kind of naked that feels extra, super good? And what are the things that are hitting the brakes? What are the things preventing me? Like the exhaustion and the not being able to turn off the chatter in your mind about whether or not all the dishes got done, not being able to turn off that sort of like accumulation of resentment. I'm married, obviously. You can tell that like I go through the process of like, is there something left that I'm feeling like bitter about? Like I wanted the lawn to get mowed and he said he would mow the lawn and he didn't mow the lawn and right? Like being able to let that kind of stuff go for a while and just be like, I really love this person. And I like him too, and I like being with him. So how about I just enjoy that for a while?
Since you mentioned underwear, I will just say, Mormons wear, at least Mormons who've been married in the temple wear garments. And one of the complaints I hear a lot from both women and men is that garments are not the sexiest, don't necessarily put us in the sexiest mood. And because it's more of a religious garment. And so I get that. And so I just want to throw out there for those who might be wondering, because I know we place a lot of importance in wearing the garment day and night in the way that we've been taught to wear it in the temple. At the same time, there's a lot of Mormons who've negotiated really great ways to still respect the garment and also find sexy things that are particular to this intentionality. So in other words, we don't have sex with our garments on. We know that. But if you have a woman who knows that she needs to, in order to be able to enjoy and place herself mentally into the mode that I'm going to have pleasure with my spouse tonight, that process for her may need to start earlier on in the day, not just 10 minutes before.
Yes, and that is not exclusive to Mormonism. That is everybody. Yeah.
And so I've worked with a lot of Mormon women who are very active and very temple worthy and all of those things, where they get to a point where they feel very comfortable putting on sexy underwear that day instead of their garments, and not seeing that as a breaking of the covenant, but seeing that as part of sexually preparing for what they're looking forward to that night. So I just want to share with the audience that there's lots of ways to negotiate things, even around some of our religious practices and beliefs, that help that sexy priming, priming our sexiness and feeling that sexual energy and putting ourselves into a position where the brakes are not as strong and where we can pay attention to the accelerators.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, this has been phenomenal. I love all the information you shared with us. I'm a total visual learner, so all your metaphors were super helpful.
Yay.
And I'd just like to turn the time over for your closing thoughts or things that you want to make sure you covered that maybe I didn't ask about.
The main thing for me is that in every religion that I have ever encountered, there is a context in which sex is celebrated for most people, right? So if you are in a context where you've been granted permission by your belief system to experience pleasure, that means you have the opportunity to do anything that feels good because your body is a gift, because your body is the one and only thing that you are born with that you will have on the day you die. Learning how to live in it with love and compassion and treat your partner's body with equal love and compassion, every single part of it, I feel like is the greatest celebration of life that there can possibly be. And I know that it's a transition for people to shift from thinking about sex as a source of shame and even disgust. But it's absolutely a transition that can happen. All you have to do is practice. And if you can start with neutral, that's interesting, you're already on the way.
And there's something very spiritual and beautiful about that. I totally agree. Yeah. I just want to put out a shout out that you are actually going to be in Utah in September. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, it is the 23rd. Is it the 23rd?
Yeah, 23rd and 24th.
Yep, September 23rd. I'm coming and doing a day-long workshop. So if you thought this hour was good, what if there were 7 of them?
Which I highly recommend if you're in the area. It's called the Rocky Mountain Summit of Sex and Intimacy, and I'll make sure and post a link to that so that if people can attend that, I think that would be great. You're going to be partnered with another sex therapist, Gina Ogden, which I think will be presenting on the other day, and she's phenomenal as well and has also been on this show. So take advantage of
She and I really love the partnership of the two of us because I bring the science and she brings the spirituality, and our two approaches actually meld really, really well, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be great, and I would encourage anytime that we're able to bring in good sex therapists to Utah, I think people should take advantage. So that'd be great. I'm not in Utah, so I won't be there, but I wish you well. Well, thank you again for your time and your wonderful energy and so much of the education you provided us today. Very valuable, and I just can't thank you enough.
It's my pleasure.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.